afternoon. If you're a reader of my blog, you know by now that I am a very big fan of CDC in tying dry flies. I found with selective trout, and the more fishing pressure our streams and rivers get, it seems that the choosier and more selective and spookier our wild trout can get. Movement in and of on the fly itself is very important, and CDC fibers do that better than just about anything when it comes to dry flies. So today I'd like to tie a wild turkey biot bodied Quill CDC comparaduns. It's a good fly. You can adapt this style and these materials in varying colors and whatnot to a lot of different flies, and catch a lot of those fish that might otherwise shun your normal hackled parachutes, Catskill style flies and whatnot, particularly on flat water where, you know, very clear flat water, they have a long time to look at the fly. And CDC fibers down in contact with the surface of the water will give you a little bit of movement with the microcurrents, and a little bit of movement of those fibers can give just enough of an imitation of life to turn the tide in your favor and make one of those trout take that fly instead of letting it go. So we're going to be tying today. For most of my CDC dry flies, I prefer the CDC puff feathers. The best I've found consistently have been Renee Harrop's Trout Hunter CDC puffs. They're larger, they're much higher quality. The dark natural dun, the light natural dun have natural oils in them. They haven't been treated and dyed. They do come in dyed colors, they're still very good, but any of the natural grayish wings, tannish wings, you can usually find a natural light or dark dun that has the brassiness for a tan. And you've got plenty of the grays here from lighter to dark among those two shades. Turkey biots, natural wild turkey biot quills. A good friend of mine, John Atgar, very accomplished bow hunter, for years has made custom arrows, and he collects the primary feathers from the wild turkey. The primaries, this one's kind of beaten up, but the primaries will look like this. He dyes them different color. These were dyed yellow, and the Quill Gordons that I've encountered very often have a darker grayish banding, but they have a yellow cast on the bottom of the bug, the side that the trout sees. So this has made a really nice Quill Gordon body. And then for the little bit of dubbing around the thorax, I make my own custom blends. I've been blending dubby for 30 years. My Quill Gordon blend is a blend of yellow beaver, natural gray muskrat, and a little bit of yellow and a little bit of gray antron dubbing that's cut up fine. If you observe bugs and copy what you see, that can make you a better fly tyer and a more effective fly fisherman. So we're going to get started here, and we're going to tie a size 14 Mark's Quill Gordon CDC comparaduns. So we'll start with a standard dry fly hook. This is a Sprite hook made in England. They're all-purpose dry fly hook. It's a nice hook I've tried recently. I'm using a 14-aught thread in a dun color, which I use a lot for all the early season mayflies, Hendrickson's blue quills, Quill Gordons, etc. A lot of these dun colored flies, I'll tend to use that dun colored thread. Go back, and we'll wind back to the point the thread's hanging right about opposite the point of the hook. And as I've done before in the other videos, we'll make a little bump of thread there. It's kind of a little anchor on the hackle. I'm not going to do split tails on these smaller flies like I do on the large ones, like the 100-year Dun series green drakes and that type of thing. I'm going to splay the fibers with a little AK Best tying trick that I learned from Archie years ago. We're using rooster covert, shoulder patch, spade feathers for the tailing material in dun. And we get our little group of fibers there. Measure them in whole hook length. Change hands. You put the fibers, hold them at an angle. Take a soft wrap with your thread and then kind of snap the bobbin up into place. And of course we had one fiber on the butt's catch there. And support them a little bit, tie a couple threads, and you'll see you get a nice little splay in the fibers. Not quite a split tail, but enough to give you some more support on the water. Tie down over most of the butts. These are kind of long, so we'll trim those off. So they're not longer than the length of the hook itself. And we'll just finish tying over them. That gives you a little bit of thickness to the underbody, which a biot body doesn't really add much thickness to itself. So to help get a little bit of more natural thickness and taper to it, we ought to use those for that underbody. And we're going to get one of the longer biot fibers. This has already had some pulled off up in here. And I'll get up here and get hold of the fiber. Pull it off. We talked about biots in the other videos. There's a little notch at the base, a little kind of a concave circular notch. When you want a smooth body, you want that notch to the rear of the hook toward the vise. Okay? And you'll see there's a plain yellow area, and then there's some area where you have yellow and barring. You kind of wanted your tie-in point to be about in the middle of that yellow area, so you get the yellow prominent, but you also immediately get it as it's covered wrapping forward. You get more of the dark barring for the segmentation and banding on the fly. So we'll tie that in. Again, that thin edge is trailing the notch side. Catch the butt with the hackle pliers. Try to make our tailing fibers behave there. And we'll start to wrap our biot, spiraling forward. As you'll see, your yellow will show through somewhat, but you get increasingly more of that yellowish brownish cast with the natural gray, the fiber, and the yellow dye's effect on it and underneath. So some of these will be darker depending on where you pull the biot fiber off the feather. You can get more of the yellow showing if you like. I tie some both ways. A little bit of variety depending on what the bugs look like on a given day. And then we'll look in here for some CDC puffs. The feathers will naturally come in different sizes. I want to save the longest ones for the largest flies and try to get one that's as close as possible to the size fly we're going to tie here. And I'm going to have 2 pieces of puff. And that puff feather is very nice, very full. Not the tiny puffs you see packaged by a lot of manufacturers. But that's all beautiful CDC fibers, natural dun color. And there's no stem in there to inhibit movement. You measure that from your tie-in point to, again, hook length, back to your standard wing position, and tie it in with a couple of pinch wraps, tied down with about 4 or 5 wraps. And then I'll take one smaller feather. I want a little bit of bulk to this wing because a lot of times you end up fishing these flies downstream, and I'm going to fish it out of the drift boat probably tomorrow. And we'll tie in that second one the same way, tie it down. And when you're fishing downstream, down across, particularly in a boat where you're making longer casts because you can't anchor the boat on top of fish, and expect them to continue to hang around and feed. You've got to get that little dam of thread there. We'll get a little bit of wonder wax on our thread, and we'll double our thorax. So you can tie sparser CDC flies at times when you're fishing them, when you're wading on flat water. If you're fishing upstream, across stream, something like that, you're fine to use one puff of this size for a 14 fly, and not necessarily add that second smaller feather. But when you're in a boat, you're particularly, or if you're on wading and making longer casts down and across stream, you're constantly stripping the fly back underwater to get it back upstream to cast again, and they get drowned, and you end up spending a little more time than you might want to puffing them up again with frog's fanny or another good powdered float to keep them fresh and keep the fly floating. I just as soon not have to do that as often, so I tie them with a little bit puffy. You don't, I've seen commercial CDC flies that look like a brush, and often using big white CDC feathers. They don't look very natural to me, and I've bought a few of those over the years when, you know, I didn't have the right size and color of body in a CDC pattern. I haven't had the best of luck with those white spotlight style flies. I like my wings to look natural, and a properly proportioned done feather will do that. We'll whip finish. Hold the fibers out of the way. We'll clip it off. We'll fluff our tail fibers a little, keep that kind of splayed, and turn it on its side a little easier, and just kind of distribute that wing just as you would a deer hair or synthetic comparadun wing. Squeeze it a little bit, help keep its form. These fibers that are all the way down the edges that get down, and when the fly sets down in the water, that's where you get your movement. And on breezy days, the CDC fibers in the upper wing can blow in the breeze, and again, the fly is moving. It looks like a live insect a lot more than a fly tied with stiff materials that doesn't. So there is our CDC turkey biot comparadun, my version for the Quill Gordon. Thank you very much.